morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to take a little bit of a look at the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game, and we have reached the end of the HeartGold SoulSilver block today. We are having a little bit of a chat about Triumphant, and Triumphant is very much one of my favourite sets ever. It was the best set in the HeartGold SoulSilver block. It brought us so many good cards and so many good decks, and I played so many of these cards. Plus it brought us an actual factual Mamoswine theme deck. So, you know I'm in from the beginning. Do make sure you tell your friends about this series. Do make sure you go and spam that like button. Because, of course, you know, these videos take so long to make. And they are not among the most popular on my channel. So, I know a bunch of people love them. Do share them around if you'd be so kind. Click the like button. I'd be delighted. Now, Triumphant was released in Japan on July the 8th, 2010, kind of. We all know the sets are a little bit screwy. And they were released in English on November the 3rd, 2010. So just after Worlds, ramping up to the 2011 competitive season. And like I've said, it was the end of the HeartGold SoulSilver block. Kind of. Next week, we're going to be talking about Call of Legends, which is this weird set that doesn't really fit into any block. Some people consider that to be the end of the HeartGold SoulSilver block. I do not. And it was a little bit weird because over in Japan they had a Lost Link mini set, and Lost Link was actually set half between Triumphant and Call of Legends, so we had half of the cards here and half of the cards in the next set, which led to weird things like Gengar that was all about throwing Pokemon into Lost Zone, and then of course we had that Lost World Stadium card that allowed you to declare that you won the game if you had enough Pokemon in the Lost Zone, which is a weird kind of mechanic. And it had to be 6, incidentally. But we got Gengar in this set, but we didn't get Lost World until Call of Legends, so Gengar was kind of a little bit just out there for a set. It did create some weirdness in that regard. Now, what was kind of cool, and I'd completely forgotten about this until I looked over on Bulbapedia, great website for research, but both Psyduck and Weeping Bell actually had the word flip misspelt as filp, which never actually got corrected. I know I'm sitting here pointing out mistakes on decade-old Pokemon cards. You would think I would have something better to do with my time. I do not. Now, the pre-release promo in this particular set was Electivire, which, honestly, I could take it or leave it. It was not one of my favourite cards from the set. Still a cool pre-release promo, mind you. And weirdly enough, we did actually have Electivire pre-release sleeves in Mysterious Treasure, but the pre-release sleeves here were Celebi sleeves, and they would be the last ones. We had pre-release sleeves from Diamond and Pearl all the way up, and then they ended in Triumphant, which is a little bit sad. Shout out to Virginia Pokemon for providing the images for all the sleeves up to now, and it's a little bit sad that they're gone, to be honest with you. I love these Celebi sleeves, though the quality had, let's just say the Lucario ones last a lot better than the Celebi ones. Now, the most expensive card in the set is actually Mew Prime. You'll be paying around about $100 for that card, and it is a combination of it being a Prime, Mew being a very popular Pokemon, and Mew Prime being a very good card. Although it's interesting to note that in terms of Pokemon Primes, this set was absolutely tripping with good Pokemon Primes. They were all good. So we're going to look through them all properly in a moment, but we had Absol Prime, we had Celebi Prime, we had Electrode Prime, we had Gengar Prime, we had Machamp Prime, Magnezone Prime, Mew Prime, and Yanmega Prime, and what is interesting is that all of those cards saw significant competitive play, which is more than we can say for the Legend cards. So we got Darkrai and Cresselia Legend, and it was fun, but it wasn't a particularly great card. For 4 energy, 100 damage, and put 2 energy from Darkrai Cresselia Legend into Lost Zone, but any Pokemon that would be KO'd by this go into the Lost Zone instead. Too awkward, too expensive. Phenomenal artwork, but too awkward and expensive. Palkia and Dialga Legend is one of the more interesting cards we have ever had in the Pokemon trading card game. It's going to get its own video at some point because it was awesome. For free energy, you got to discard all metal from this Pokemon and then add the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck to his or her prize cards. So, and it was not that easy to accelerate metal energy, unfortunately, but you could literally here get to the stage where your opponent had all of their deck. You could deck your opponent out by giving them extra prize cards, but every time you put the cards down, they would have fewer cards in their deck to use, and they would be further away from winning the game. We tried to make this work, believe me, pretty much the entire player base tried to get this card working. It never really did, but it's one of the most interesting cards we have ever seen. It is awesome. Now, in terms of the theme decks, I did kind of spoil the surprise right at the beginning, but we actually had full-on proper job Mamoswine theme deck. I'm talking about Verdant Frost, and it's an actual Mamoswine theme deck. Now, it's a grass water theme deck. Yes, obviously I picked this one up. I'm not stupid. And you got yourself a Hollow Mamoswine, which was a cracked Ice Hollow Mamoswine, which was exclusive, which was awesome. But you also got yourself a non-Hollow Mamoswine and a non-Hollow Venomoth, both of which were exclusive to the deck, because Mamoswine and Venomoth were only hollows in the set. So not only was it a Mamoswine theme deck, but it came with 2 exclusive Mamoswine, just in case it wasn't awesome enough. There were also non-hollow rares for both Kricketune and Golduck. But it's a Mamoswine theme deck with 2 exclusive Mamoswine. What more do you need to know? Over in Royal Guard, it was a Nidoking theme deck, and I can only assume this was bought exclusively by people that found the Mamoswine theme deck out of stock. And you got yourself a hollow, cracked ice hollow Nidoking, which was exclusive to the theme deck. You then got a non-hollow version, which wasn't exclusive because Nidoking was a non-hollow normally. And then you got yourself non-hollow versions of Machamp, Grumpig, and Bayonet, none of which were exclusive. You'll notice this was also one of the very rare sets that did actually have a booster pack in the theme deck. They started doing this in the previous set in Undaunted. It didn't last long, but it was still popping along here. Now, in terms of best cards, there were a bunch of cards in the set that were very, very good, but none of them were as good as Junkarm. Junkarm is that card, the kind of card, it's not just good, it fundamentally changes the way we play the game. It was a trainer card, remember back then trainer meant item, that let you discard 2 cards from your hand and search your discard pile for a trainer card, what would nowadays be an item card, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. Though you couldn't use Junkarm to get Junkarm and start looping, that would be silly. But it meant that you would just always have access to cards you needed. It meant things like plus power, you would have 8 in your deck rather than 4. It meant that when Pokemon Catcher came along a little bit later, you would have 4 Pokemon Catcher, which did not need a coin flip initially, and 4 Junkarm to reuse them, and it meant that both players would always have Pokemon Catcher, which did add a lovely degree of certainty to the game. Junkarm was one of those cards where you basically had to put 4 of them into every deck, unless you had a really good reason not to, so you were playing a Vileplume, for instance, or something along those lines. Otherwise, you had to put 4 in your deck. It was that gosh darn good. Now, I said all of the primes were good, and they were. We need to start off having a look at Magnezone. Magnezone was amazing. Magnezone won US Nationals with Yanmega. Magnezone won Worlds with Emboar. Magnezone was amazing. It had a poker-powered magnetic draw that let you draw until you have 6 cards in your hand. It meant you could actually play multiple Stage 2 decks, because one of them would be Magnezone, and that would let you draw cards. But it also had an attack Lost Burn that did 50 damage for each energy card you popped in the Lost Zone, and you could put any energy from any of your Pokemon into the Lost Zone. So if you could accelerate a bunch of energy around the field using, Emboar, yeah, it won Worlds, you would just be able to do ridiculous damage using Lost Burn while drawing with Magnetic Draw. It was redonkulous. Mew Prime was also redonkulous. Now, 60 HP on a Pokemon Prime might sound terrible, and it was, but it had free retreat, and the Pokeball Lost Link. which allowed you to use the attacks of all Pokemon in the Lost Zone, yours and your opponent's, though you needed the necessary energy to attack. Fun little fact, I got second place at a Triumphant pre-release with a Mewchamp deck because I pulled Mew Prime and Machamp Prime, but I didn't have the full evolution line for Machamp, so I would just Lost Zone it and copy it with Mew. Mew did have an attack that could put one of your Pokemon into Lost Zone, but there were better Pokemon for putting stuff into the Lost Zone. Was kind of cool. We'd use it sometimes, but Mew was generally used as a bit of a box deck where you would put a bunch of different Pokemon in the Lost Zone and then just copy all the attacks as you liked. Mew was awesome. We also saw Machamp Prime. Now, Machamp Prime was a very, very good card. It had a really nice ability where you could move all your fighting energy from your active to Machamp and switch to the active. So get it in the active with all the energy on. 3 energy, 60 damage, discard a special energy. 4 energy, 100 damage, plus 10 more for each of your bench Pokemon with any damage on. And that's why so many people played it with Donphan. Single energy, 60, and 10 to all of your bench, which then meant that Machamp would do a huge amount of damage. For a very long time, Machamp was played with Donphan. I played it with Donphan for a long time. I remain absolutely convinced, bearing in mind I was playing for the entire time that Machamp was legal, and when I say playing, I mean attending a lot of tournaments, pretty much every weekend, and I still contend that Donphan without Machamp was actually a better deck in the end. Took me a long time to realise that. Electrode Prime was another Pokemon. I played way more of it than I should have. Electrode Prime was played for the Energy Might Poké Power that let you knock out the Pokemon. And yes, that did mean your opponent took a prize. But then you looked at the top 7 cards of your deck and attached as many energy as you like to any of your Pokemon in any way that you like. It was great for setting up big basic decks that didn't really exist when Triumphant came out, but we'll see more of them when we get deep into Black and White. Yanmega Prime saw a huge amount of play. We're going to go through decks that came from Triumphant in a moment. Let's just say there are no fewer than 3 super relevant Yanmega decks. No, I'm lying to you. 4 super relevant Yanmega decks, and it was just amazing. The Pokeball Insight said that if you had the same number of cards in hand as your opponent, you attacked for free, and you had free retreat, so free attacks, free retreat, and because we had Copycat that shuffled your hand into your deck and drew cards equal to your opponent's, and Judge, you and your opponent both shuffle the hand into their deck and draw 4 cards, we had 8 supporters you could play in each deck that would guarantee you attacks for free, which probably goes to explain why Yanmega was so gosh darn good. You could then do 40 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon, or just 70 damage to the active, but when you're attacking for free, that made a huge difference. The attacks were fine, but the free attack, free retreat really is what made Yanmega amazing. Absol Prime was a fun little one that didn't see quite as much play, though it was good. The ability said that whenever your opponent puts a basic Pokemon onto their bench, they take 2 damage counters, if Absol is active. And for 2 energy, Vicious Claw did 70 damage, and let you put a Pokemon from your hand into the Lost Zone. So it was quite nice to be able to do damage while getting your Pokemon into the Lost Zone for something like Mew. And then we had Gengar. Gengar was a weird one. Gengar, if it was active, any Pokemon that would be knocked out went into the Lost Zone instead. But the only damaging attack you had was Curse Drop, that put 4 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like, which to be fair could put a baby into the Lost Zone. Hurl into Darkness let you look at your opponent's hand and choose a number of Pokemon up to the number of Psychic Energy on Gengar to put into the Lost Zone. That would of course mean that your opponent would try and keep their hand with no Pokemon in, but you could always play stuff like Judge to force them into a new hand. The fact of the matter is, Gengar was an awful lot of fun, and it needed Lost World in the following set, as we mentioned earlier, It was such a hyped deck. At the time, Gengar was expected to be the best deck. It was supposed to be this overpowering deck. People were genuinely worried that Gengar Lost World would ruin the game and make it uncompetitive, and in fact, it ended up being a bit meh, which was a little bit sad. While we're talking Gengar, we do need to mention Spiritomb, of course, that made your opponent shuffle the hand into their deck and draw a new hand of 6 cards, which is obviously really good if you were using Gengar's attack. Gengar was fun, but it did end up being a bit of a gimmick in the end, which is a little bit sad. In terms of non-Pokemon Prime, Ditto was a fun one. Had the Pokeball Ditto-bolic, love the name there, which just said that both players can only have 4 bench Pokemon, and if you had a 5th, you must discard 1 and all cards attached to them. Nice for a little bit of disruption. Sharpedo was an absolutely hilarious card. Stage 1 Pokemon single energy 20 damage, and you had to flip 2 coins and they both had to be heads, which is a lot. But if you did flip double heads, your opponent discarded their entire hand. It was always a bit more of a gimmick than a real deck, but people did play it, and if you played enough at the time, you did get double heads in a game at a tournament, and it's one of the worst feelings you can get as a player. Although as a Sharpedo player, it's probably one of the best feelings you can get. Venomoth was a rather fun one. Had a rather nice ability, or poker power as it was back then, that once during your turn, flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active is poisoned. If tails, your active is poisoned, but you blatantly have a Pokemon, you can get out the active. And it did pair very, very nicely with that Leafeon that we looked at last week, which does 50 damage for each special condition affecting the defending Pokemon. Yeah, that worked quite nicely. You might also notice some of these cards like Venomoth have ridiculously stunning artwork. It's because they were from the Lost Link mini set. When I were younger, when this was out, I was very close to buying a box of Lost Link. I decided not to. I regret that decision pretty much every day. I'm literally recording this video now, looking at it and going, why didn't I buy a box of Lost Link? I wouldn't have kept it sealed, but I blatantly would have put it all in a binder and I would have been so happy. Never mind. Mamoswine, I mean, look, there's a Mamoswine in the set. We're going to talk about it. The artwork, again, is stunning. It's not a particularly amazing card, I must be honest with you. 3 energy, 40 damage plus sleep, or 4 energy, 70 damage plus 20 to each your opponent's bench that has any damage on. It was never a good or competitive card, but if you think there's going to be a new Mamoswine card and I'm going to do a history video and not give it a little bit of spotlight, you clearly don't watch my channel often enough and you haven't noticed the logo in the bottom left-hand corner. Back to cards that were actually good. Magmortar. Now, Magmortar was very much a fringe deck, but it's about the most fun fringe deck you will ever find. You see, Magmortar, for 1 fire energy minimum, you discarded a top card from your opponent's deck for each fire energy on Magmortar, and then you flipped a coin, and if tails, you had to discard all the fire energy. It was an actual mill deck in a format where mill decks were not really much of a thing. But you had Typhlosion Prime, which would accelerate energy to it, and it was a lot of fun. It was very much kind of a beginner fun league deck than a real competitive deck that you would take to a tournament, but it needed to be mentioned quickly. Now, over in trainer cards, we need to have a little bit of a chat about Alpha Lithograph. Yeah, that's right. We've talked about Alpha Lithographs in all the sets so far. This is the first time we could just leave it till we were talking about the good cards, because it's the first one that's actually a proper good card. It let you look at your face down prize cards. But bearing in mind, if you've got cards in your prizes that you want, that's really good. You combine it with a Rotom that let you essentially grab a card out from your prizes, and it was awesome, ladies and gentlemen. It was absolutely awesome. Saw a huge amount of play, especially in Durant decks, but we're not there yet. Now, Seeker was a very, very nice card indeed. It made both players pick up one of their benched Pokemon. But you would pick up something like a Uxie, and then play it back down to draw until you got 7 cards in your hand, and your opponent would hopefully be forced into picking up something they didn't want to. At the European Challenge Cup in 2012, the biggest tournament in Europe, I was playing a Regigigas EX deck, And I was playing against a Donphan Prime. And I didn't want to fight the Donphan Prime, so I would just kept making my opponent switch their active. And eventually I'd knocked out so many weaker Pokemon that my opponent only had their active and a bench Donphan Prime, in which case I played Seeker. They had to pick up their bench Donphan, and I never had to actually go and bother taking it out. Yes, I did feel bad taking down a Donphan. Seeker was amazing for reusing your own Pokemon when coming into play abilities, but it was also amazing for picking up your opponent's Pokemon. Maybe it's an evolution Pokemon that they then have to re-evolve, or maybe, as in the example I just gave you, it will literally win you the game outright. Twins was another fantastically important card. It was one of these that let you search your deck for any 2 cards whatsoever and put them into your hand, just so long as you were losing, you were behind in the game. Well, there were a bunch of decks that played from behind, like a lot of Stage 2 decks, and Twins was amazing. If you were playing a slower deck, a lock deck, a Stage 2 deck, whatever, Twins was an absolute godsend. You would never play it in faster decks, but in slower decks or decks that played from behind, you would absolutely play Twins. It was amazing. As was Rescue Energy. It was a colorless energy, but if the Pokemon it's attached to gets KO'd by damage from an attack, i.e. not poison and damage counters or things like that, then the Pokemon went into your hand, including pre-evolutions, but not energy or tools or any of that. Saw so much play in so many decks, because it let you keep your Pokemon and just replay them, re-evolve them, etc. It was awesome. And then Black Belt. Now, Black Belt was more of a bit of a fringe card, saw play in some decks, but far from all of them. But essentially, if you were behind on prizes, you could play this, and this turn your Pokemon did 40 more damage. It was one of those cards that just messed up the math for your opponent. Your opponent would be going, ha 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 ha, I'm not going to be KO'd, I am safe. And then you just be like, boom, Black Belt, I win, in your face. But, you know, hopefully nicer. Now, moving into top decks, there are far more than we usually have to talk about in these history videos. But we've got to start off with Magnezone Yanmega, Primetime as it was regularly called. Although honestly, I never really got that name and I never really liked it, and I wish it didn't have that name, but hey ho. The reason we've got to start with Primetime is because Justin Sanchez won US Nationals using it and then had a good run at Worlds with it. So it seems like not using it would be a little bit silly. And essentially, although they look like very different Pokemon, they actually worked together absolutely beautifully. Because you've got Yanmega here that attacked for 0 energy. And then you've got Magnezone, which ended up being a very energy-hungry Pokemon. So essentially what you would do is you would lead off with Yanmega, doing a bunch of damage here and there, taking some cheeky KOs. I should mention there were a lot of baby Pokemon around. If there was a baby Pokemon on the bench, linear attack would KO, which was amazing. And then while you were attacking with Yanmega, you'd build up all of your energy around the field, ready for when Magnezone could come in and finish the game with Lost Burn. Magnetic Draw obviously became your draw engine for the game, and you'd even play Kingdra. And I know that's a second stage too, but again, Magnezone drawing so many cards really did make that a possibility. A good possibility. And then you had single energy 60 damage, and an ability that once during your turn you could place a damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Bearing in mind you'd then be sniping around with linear attack, and this worked together beautifully. Won US Nationals, did well at Worlds. It was a top deck. Now, I mentioned Machamp Donphan earlier. There's not a huge amount we really need to add to this. It really was a deck that was just lead with Donphan using Earthquake, and then when you had enough energy on the board, when you had damage on all of your bench, you would bring in Machamp and just start smashing. Rainbow Energy, though, does deserve a little bit of a mention here, because it's an energy that puts a damage on one of your Pokemon. So if you didn't have damage on one of your Pokemon, maybe the Donphan with which you were attacking, Rainbow Energy would put it on there and let Machamp do an extra 10 damage. This was a deck I played a ridiculous ridiculous amount of, though like I've said, far too late, I discovered that Donphan, he was just better on his own, and I will fight for that opinion, quite frankly. Now, Sharpedo is a deck I want to mention quickly. It was not a particularly great deck, but over on PTCG Archive, another great site for research, they have taken a quick look at Justin Williams' deck, with which he took top 128 at US Nationals. Again, it's so flippy. Even that is a fantastic achievement. So, Sharpedo, you want to flip double heads and make your opponent discard their entire hand. You've then got the Weavile from Undaunted, that when you evolve into it, you can choose a card from your opponent's hand and discard it. And that Slowking that lets you rearrange the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. And you essentially use all of these together to try and make sure that your opponent just has nothing. So much fun, ladies and gentlemen. So much fun. Not like a really good, viable deck, but still a huge amount of fun. Now, Magmortar Typhlosion is one that's mentioned over on Jason Klaczynski's awesome blog. Another great website to use for research. And essentially here, you're just using Typhlosion to accelerate energy to Magmortar so that you can mill your opponent and hope that you flip heads, so you don't have to keep discarding the energy. If you do, you will run out of energy faster than you might like. Ninetales becomes a really good card in this deck because you discard a fire energy from your hand and draw 3 cards. Great for draw. Obviously, because you're aiming to mill your opponent, you're not taking prizes, so you're behind for the entire game. So Twins is amazing. And we even need to shout out Flower Shop Lady here, that got 3 Pokemon and 3 energy cards back into your deck, as well as Burned Tower, that were really useful for making sure you always had that energy. Pretty gosh darned important. Now, we need to finish off with a little bit of a run of Yanmega decks here, starting off with Yanmega, Vileplume, Mew. Now, Vileplume we looked at last week. This was the one that just blocked trainer cards. Remember, what would be item cards nowadays. And that slowed down your opponent and yourself, but of course you would build your deck so it really didn't matter. And you would essentially sit there with Yanmega, bearing in mind you've got Judge and you've got Copycat to try and make sure you got the same number of cards in your hand. And then you would even use Sunflora here. Sunflora would let you search for a grass Pokemon. So if you were playing cards and you needed to beef up your hand a little bit, Sunflora would actually do that quite nicely. Obviously, it would search out your Yanmega and your Vileplume, but it was sneakily good for just beefing up your hand to match your opponent. Obviously, being a Stage 2 deck, Twins was a really good card in here as well. And although you could attack with Yanmega, you'd probably try and attack with Mew. And yes, I know Yanmega's attacks are free and Mew's attacks aren't, so it's probably more correct to say you would be switching between them, but Yanmega could copy a bunch of stuff like the Muck from Undaunted, switch the defending Pokemon with one of your opponent's bench, and the new defending Pokemon is confused and poisoned, and of course they can't use any trainer cards, and then you just start using linear attack to just hit the bench over and over again. They're stuck in the active, they're poisoned, they're confused. You've hopefully dragged some in the active that couldn't attack anyway, and then Yanmega snipes around. Yanmega Weavile was another really fun one that a bunch of people played. Yanmega we've talked about a lot, and it's got the Weavile Slowking combo that we just talked about. Weavile gets cards out of your opponent's hand, Slowking ruins your opponent's top decks, and then you just sit there attacking with Yanmega. One of the things that makes this deck so good is you're trying to use Judge with Yanmega anyway, so essentially you keep judging until you are fairly sure your opponent's got a bad hand, then you start using Weavile and Slowking, and your opponent is basically locked out of the game while you just sit there hitting him with Yanmega. It was fun. And then we need to quickly mention Yanmega Kingdra, which, according to the lovely folks at PTCG Archive, did go and get a top 4 finish at US Nationals, piloted by Dylan Lefevre, and I apologise for the pronunciation of that one. And again, it's everything we've seen so far. Yanmega's sitting there spreading damage around with linear attack, doing a bit of damage with Sonic Boom. We've got Judge and Copycat to make sure that we are doing enough damage here for free. We've got Kingdra that can attack for 1 energy, but can also just drop damage counters around to help. And then there's a couple of other important cards. Blissey, when you evolve into it, you remove all damage counters from all of your Pokemon and discard all energy. But Yanmega attacks for 0 energy and Kingdra for 1, so you're really not worried about losing energy. And then you would use my old pal Jirachi, and, well, you've got Stardust Song. So when you bench it, flip 3 coins for each heads, attach a Psychic from your discard to Jirachi. And then for minimum 1 Psychic, for each Psychic on there, for each energy on there, you just get to devolve one of your opponent's Pokemon. So you spread damage around with Kingdra and Yanmega, devolve with Jirachi, and they get instantly KO'd. Triumphant was fun. Outside of trainers and primes, there wasn't very much in there. Regular Pokemon, it was not a great set. But the primes were amazing, the trainers were amazing, and it gave us so many good decks. And we've not even mentioned some of the decks that were made by cards here, because we needed to wait a little while to get some more cards. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is everything you need to know about Triumphant. Triumphant will go down for me as one of the best sets ever, certainly one of my favourite sets ever, and I love that all of the primes ended up being really good. Plus, and I'm going to say this one more time, it had a Mamoswine theme deck. Oh, it was fun. But I want to know your memories, ladies and gentlemen, and if you weren't playing back then and don't have any memories, I'd like to know your thoughts now that you've seen it. So let me know in the comment section. Go nuts, be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all kinds of fun things. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.